Okay, and with that, I will pass it over to Janice to continue with the panelist discussion.
Great. Thank you, Katie, for that. To kick off our panel discussion, I'll be speaking with Dr. Stephanie Hinton, Director of Early Childhood at Oklahoma City Public Schools. Thank you for being with us today, Stephanie. So speaking from the administrator perspective, how did you assess and respond to the needs of families within the context of the whole school community?
Sure. So when we had to make the decision to move towards continuous learning, we called it our continuous learning, or I think it's more often referred to as distance learning. We had to take our direction from the State Department of Education first. They provided some parameters for us to follow. During that time, while we were developing the plan, we also asked our teachers to survey our parents and families on information about technology in the home, access in the home, access to Wi-Fi, and also preferences. This allowed us to make some decisions on what distance learning would look like. And what we came up with was a mix of online resources as well as continuous learning packets. And our website actually includes all of the information if people are interested in looking at what our final plan looks like. So with that, we created parameters for expectations for teachers. And so while we had a district-wide learning plan, our teachers were able to then go in and provide interventions or continuation of learning opportunities for kiddos based on the plans. And so there was a lot of freedom there, and it was really cool to see how teachers kind of took that and ran with it, and the different experiences that they provided, enrichment experiences that they provided for their students as well during that time. So I think that answers that question. It was a lot of information that we were compiling at once and kind of sorting through it to create something that would meet the needs of a large number of families, as we serve, I think, about 42,000 kiddos in our district.
Great, thank you. And so you said that the district was able to quickly survey parents. Do you mind just telling us, was that an online survey, or how did they pull that together in such a quick fashion at that time?
That's a great question. We actually have the teachers individually call the parents and just ask them a list of questions. And so that was kind of the best way to do it. We realized that we do have some families that have some limited options when it comes to access. And to Dr. Dahlke's point, sometimes you might have two devices at home, but with families working from home, those devices were being used. And so yeah, so we had a personal phone call to families to get that information.
Great, thank you for that. So it sounds like you're using a variety of different distance learning opportunities and tools and resources. Can you describe primarily what the pre-K and kindergarten students are using at home? What did you learn from that survey?
So for early childhood, we really focused on learning experiences for the family, right? So we know there are lots of applications, et cetera, that they can get on and play, and that's going to reiterate some recall information like learning your ABCs or working with number recognition. But we wanted to provide a plan that we know is based on brain research for the young child. So that included learning that's social and experience-based. So some of the activities involved going on a nature hunt and looking for items, building patterns with leaves, having conversations that would increase verbal vocabulary, expressive vocabulary for the student. So our plan was pretty focused on how we could provide some natural learning opportunities in the home. Another example that was one of my favorites was setting the table and discussing how many plates you would need, how many forks you would need, and that one-to-one correspondence piece.
Great. All of these ideas sound really doable and fairly straightforward, so not intimidating to families, and that's really encouraging. What supports did Oklahoma City Public Schools provide directly to the teachers as they were planning for and implementing these different distance learning activities and trying to ramp up this new way of teaching and working with families?
Sure. So we actually, we have this incredible department in our district that focuses on PD, on educational technology, and so they actually provided several videos and resources that we pushed out to teachers on how to use, simple things like Google Hangout or Seesaw or different educational strategies through continuous learning, ways to connect with families. And we were, just so incredibly encouraged by the number of teachers that engaged in professional learning during this time to just connect with their families and make sure that the students were having these learning opportunities.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hinton. Next, I'll be speaking with Skyla Lewis, a kindergarten teacher. Hi, Ms. Lewis. How are you?
Good. Hello, everyone.
Great. Thank you for being here. How have you maintained open lines of communication between home and school with the students and families in your classroom?
During the distance learning, I contacted families through phone calls and an app called ClassTag. And ClassTag is what I had used before distance learning, so it was just easy to keep that going. But I just when I called parents, I just let them know that I'm there for them and their well-being. And I would just check on them to see how it was going before I even talked about their child's education. And same thing with the child. I just talked to them about what's going on in their lives and how they're doing. And I could tell that my parents appreciated that. And then just letting them know that I'm available any time of the day for them, not just a certain amount of day, just any time they could call me with questions. And I
That's
think
great.
that
I'm sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure that they appreciated that connection, that personal touch that you gave to take time to really talk with them and understand what they're going through, as well as sharing your concern and interest in their child's well-being. So we're hearing that teachers all over the country are building relationships with families in all kinds of new ways. For example, some teachers are setting up weekly check-in phone calls with families. Some are holding class meetings online once a day or once a week, depending on interest and availability, need, accessibility, things like that, availability of internet access and so on. What are you doing to stay in touch with the families and the students, not just the families, but the students, on a weekly basis?
The phone calls that I make weekly were mainly just to check in with the parents and just see how it's going. And then for the students, I did Google Hangouts. And the first few Google Hangouts I did, I just let the kids talk to each other.
And then did you do any facilitated learning during those Google Hangouts as well?
Yes, but I try to keep it fun. Like, can you go find me something in your house that makes the sound or starts with the letter F? I just did little activities like that. But I also would just send videos of me and my family and just things that I would do with my son, so they kind of understood that I'm in the same boat with them as them. And I think that they appreciated that.
I'm sure that they did. What recommendations are you sharing with families about how to manage the children's learning activities as well as their own work responsibilities? We're hearing a lot about that struggle and that tug and pull between, keeping children engaged and on task with learning, but also parents having to deal with other work responsibilities.
A lot of my parents work, and a lot of them work at night. But I just told them that kids love routine, and if they're able to set the same time aside every day just with their child that would be great for them, especially with all of this change. So I recommended they do that. And our district had came up with, like Ms. Hinton said, with the online and paper packets. So I tried to share before the packet came out the vocabulary with the parents and things that I did. So if one of the things were rhyming, I would say, well, this is another way how I did rhyming with the kids that they're familiar with to make them feel more comfortable.
Great. Thank you. These are all great ideas and insights, Ms. Lewis. Thank you for sharing.
And
So families are being challenged in new ways during the pandemic. Many are juggling their own work responsibilities with those of one or more other adults in the home, and they're doing their best to help their children with distance learning activities all at the same time. Our next panelist is a parent and an educator. Andrew Rose has a 4-year-old daughter, Ella, who's a student in the Oklahoma City Public Schools Universal Pre-K program. Hi, Andrew. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well.
Great. Thank you for being here with us today and for sharing about your family's experiences. So as a parent, what were your greatest concerns when you learned that distance learning was going to happen and that you would need to step in to support your daughter's educational goals at home?
Right, yeah, really to kind of touch on what Ms. Lewis just said was routine and providing the different, the aspects of social experience and developmental play. And so it was really building that routine with Ella and trying to figure it out as we go. That was kind of my biggest concern was keeping that routine.
Right. And has that happened now that we're 2 months into this? Is that routine still holding steady?
It is. One of the things that my daughter's really good at is recalling what her actual schedule is like with her teacher, Ms. Hall. And so we just sat down, on day one, and I said, "Hey, tell me a little bit about what it's like for you at school." And so I had her write down the schedule, and so we used that as a resource so that we could make sure that she had her drawing time in the morning and what we called center time, reading and math time. All of those things we kept to the schedule, and it's really because of Ella's memory of what she did at school and really the good job that her teacher did in instilling that routine.
That's fantastic. I'm sure that really helps her to feel grounded and to feel like this is not as strange and uncertain as it otherwise could be in her world. So that's great. So how about you? In actuality, how are you managing your own responsibilities with work and family responsibilities, things like that, as well as balancing Ella's routine and her learning activities and growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. In our particular situation, my wife has been working from home, so she's needed, space and time to focus on her responsibilities as well. And then on top of that, we have a 7-month-old who also requires a lot of attention. And so we found a balance where I would help Ella in the morning with school, and then our son would kind of sit with my wife so that she could keep an eye on him. And then we'd get to a point in our routine, our daily schedule, where it was time for recess, essentially. And so I would take both kids on an extended walk or a bike ride so that my wife could then focus more on some conference calls or whatever she had at the time each day. That was kind of the things that we were balancing. And it wasn't always perfect. There were some times where it was very challenging, especially early on while we were trying to figure it out. but I think we got to a point where, and you'll probably hear me emphasize this again, we were good enough. And that would be my main takeaway from it.
Right, right. And that's wonderful that you all have figured out this ebb and flow that works for your family, and families across the country are doing exactly that, trying to figure out what works and so on. So great. Thank you for sharing your family's experiences. So we're a couple of months into this new routine. Yeah. Thinking back a little bit on the beginning of this process back in March, can you reflect on your experiences and tell us what would have been helpful for your child's school or her teacher to know about your home situation and your preparedness to support your child before this emergency situation occurred? So in a perfect situation, what would you have liked them to know ahead of time?
Well, truthfully, I think our district did a really good job. You heard a lot about the procedure of contacting families, and so I really appreciated Ms. Hall, who's Ella's teacher, calling us at the beginning, asking us what we had access to, digitally, or would we be needing paper resources. One of the things that happened to us early on was we have a printer, but it kind of didn't work for us very well, and so I had a hard time printing things out. So the paper packets were helpful too, because we could go collect those. Having like counselors perhaps available, which is something that our district provided. There's a hotline that parents can call, or even I think students can call as well. Can be helpful. Just different things that about how the resources are going to look from the end user's perspective, whether you're going to need things like scissors to be able to cut maybe some manipulatives out. Those are the kinds of things that I can think of would be great questions to ask at the beginning. But like I said, I really think our district did a fantastic job in calling parents, asking us what we needed, what would be helpful. That's a great way to start.
Right, and this situation, of course, is unprecedented. We haven't ever had to shift gears as quickly or in such a high caliber way in the past, and there's much to be learned from all of this. So those insights are really helpful. Thinking ahead now, and sort of thinking through, what it's going to be like to go back to school later. How do you think schools and teachers can work with families to develop these contingency teaching plans should something like this happen again? Should some of this happen on the front end of the school year, or what's your opinion about this moving forward?
Yeah, my main concern will be, these impacts of interruption and change on our daughter. If I can, this is going to be her second year in a row that she'll be in a different building and with a teacher who she'll be new to. And Ella has typically taken a while to adjust to that change. And so I would encourage both parents and districts to be ready to communicate and listen. Last fall, when our daughter moved from daycare to pre-K, we had to seek some help from a therapist and work through some of the tough times that she was having. So she recommended a specific research-based approach to Ella's feelings that's been really helpful. And one of the consistent messages we received from therapy was to talk with teacher and principal about where our daughter was emotionally and any insights we've gained. And so maybe building in time and space for students to talk about their feelings when they return.
Right.
And where they are both emotionally and academically, just really giving space and time for that.
Yeah, I hear you. I think you're exactly right. That's going to be very important. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing that parent perspective with us. It's important for us to hear that, and we honor that, your words and your opinions on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so where do we go from here? Next, I want to ask our panelists some questions that have relevance really to each of their unique circumstances as a program administrator, a teacher, and as a parent. The first question is for Dr. Hinton and then for Ms. Lewis. Given what you know now, what would you do to prepare for the possibility of a similar situation in the future? Dr. Hinton?
Yeah, I kind of want to say knock on wood, you know, I would love for us to be in person and then learning experiences in the classroom again. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we can take from this experience to apply for similar situations, but also just apply towards like changing and shifting where we're currently at before COVID-19. So obviously my first go-to is training and supports for teachers. What gaps exist there that we weren't able to fill in such a limited amount of time? How can we further encourage teachers in their role? Having been through this once, I think utilizing resources more towards what we can provide in the home, whether that's Wi-Fi hotspots or materials and items for families like scissors were mentioned earlier, those types of things that can be at the home to support learning. And also books. I mean, man, we can't have enough books in the home for young children, and so how can we make sure that kiddos have all those opportunities and that we can provide a somewhat level playing field when it comes to resources and accesses when we have to shift to at-home learning. I think that there's no way that these last 8 weeks won't impact education in the future. And so how we do PD differently, how we engage with parents differently, I think about that a lot too. Oftentimes when we think about parent involvement, we're talking about back to school night and parent orientation, but you just heard from Ms. Lewis that, you know, she contacted her parents on a regular basis to check in on them and see how they were doing. To me, that's more meeting parents where they're at and building them up than what parent involvement sometimes has looked like in the past. And then, as Mr. Rose pointed out, we had a number of hotlines to support parents and how we can continue to provide those supports for our families if we're in a similar situation, or even if we're just in our regular day-to-day type situation. How can we provide a person that you can call on the phone and say, I'm helping my kiddo with some at-home learning and I'm just not really sure what's required here. So I think there's lots of lessons that can be learned from this situation, and obviously lots of ideas going on in my brain about how we might do things differently going forward if we're in a similar situation.
Right, and one of the questions that's come up from our participants, I want to just throw in here real quick because it's an important one, is how do you foresee being able to help pre-K students and their families who are transitioning into your programs in the fall for the very first time to make that transition smoothly? Have you begun to think about that and what that might look like for those folks that don't have an established relationship with you all yet, with either the administration or teachers?
I think the important thing to remember is we're in uncharted territory, right? So we actually just we're in the middle of our pre-enrollment period for incoming families, and I do get lots of concerned parents calling and saying, what will next year look like? And while I don't know exactly what next year is going to look like, we are planning for business as usual, but we can provide a safety net for families by just being available and answering their questions. And oftentimes parents and families have these incredible questions that I haven't thought through, right? So coming from that perspective of an incoming parent, that's a great idea. We need to think about this while we're coming up with our back to school plans if it's going to be different than usual. And so we have a great team in our district. They're our emergency response team, and they're working through all the different scenarios of what it can look like. But it's hard to make decisions for next year without knowing exactly what it will look like, but we can provide support and resources for families as we're connecting with them for next school year.
Great, thank you. Ms. Lewis, do you have anything new or different to add to Dr. Hinton's descriptions?
Sorry. No, I think she said it was good. I assured my parents, because they don't know, we don't know what next year looks like, and that they were worried about their students or their child's growth. And I just reminded parents that we're educators and we always meet the child's needs first. So just because we miss fourth quarter doesn't mean we're just going to expect them to know all of those things, that we will meet them where they are and they don't have to worry.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that concern as well. I'm glad you're reassuring them. Thank you for that. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move to our final question. And it's really for any of our panelists. What lessons can we learn from the current distance learning experience? What worked? What didn't work so great? And in your opinion, what do we need to be thinking about if we have this similar situation come up in terms of structures around distance learning experiences? Would any of the panelists like to jump in at this point?
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
I think,
I can, go ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Stephanie or Skylar.
Okay. I was just going to reiterate, I think just being mindful of opportunities for professional development, how we might shift that going into next year, and also how we connect with families and how we involve parents in the process of learning. I think there's so much to be learned from how we've connected with families over the last 5 weeks and how we might continue to do that in years to come.
Great, thank you. Andrew, you want the final word on this topic, and then we'll move on.
Sure, yeah. This is kind of two parts. So again, for districts, just think about what your resources are going to look like for the end user. So just as one example, if you're printing paper resources and you need a manipulative to be cut out by the parent or the student, make sure that the backside is cleared and that it doesn't have another resource or important information on that other side, because they're basically cutting into their manipulative. So that's just one practical specific piece right there. And then for parents, once again, I would just say give yourself permission to be good enough, because it's hard and the goal is to try your best. Think of ways to connect, practical skills and context to your child's learning goals. Like, for example, one of the weekly themes we had was nature. So I took Ella camping in the backyard, and through just simple curiosity, we expanded on her learning. She was really curious about the stars, and she was amazed at how bright the moon was. So there's a lot of experiences that can be tied to the learning goals that your child has.
Great. Thank you for that. And I want to thank our panelists for all of these great insights and ideas. Very helpful, really good suggestions all the way through.